Hello. Long time no see. I haven't really been making videos for the past year. If you watched my previous announcements videos, you know why. I got my first full-time job, and it just hasn't left me a lot of time for hobbies. But in addition to that, I just also have gotten other hobbies. But at least for now, hello. Let's take a look at my story graph for 2023. So 2023 was a pretty good reading year by my standards. I always have kind of a soft goal to read 2 books a month. I guess it's like 24 is my real goal, 20 is my fallback goal, and 25 is like my stretch goal. But I didn't reach any of those goals this year. I read 19 books, but I'm very happy with my 19 books. And I read 6,683 pages. Last year I only read 5,907 pages. And in 2021, which I think was a really good read, that was the year that I actually met my goal. 20 books, 6,859 pages. So, I'm pretty content with the amount that I read. Oh, and one thing that I did different this year is that I actually gave star ratings to everything I read. Like I just said, I don't really like to sit down and do whole reviews, but I did want to give star ratings and be able to go back and see which books I really liked, which books I felt kind of meh about. Again, just it helps me see the trends. Maybe am I giving 5-star ratings to a lot of fantasy books and giving 3-star ratings to a lot of, YA. So not thorough reviews, just literally the stars and then the questions that Storygraph asks you, I answered those. But yeah, we'll see if we notice any trends there as well. The first kind of category is moods. And wow, this is, I want to say compared to previous years, this is one of the most evenly distributed moods charts that I've seen. Interesting. My biggest mood for 2023 was dark, which is not something that I normally gravitate towards. Let's see. So I did read a couple horror mystery things this year. That's true. I read Murder in the Family and When No One Is Watching, which are both intended as, I guess the point is that they're dark. So let me talk a little bit about those two. I received When No One Is Watching as a present from Crystal, and it's a horror story about gentrification. That's pretty much the best way to describe it. In a way, it kind of reminds me of The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin, where it's about gentrification in New York, but there's also some magical realism, sci-fi elements going on. There are fantasy elements going on. This story follows 2 people. It's so long ago that I read it, and I can't remember either of the characters' names. Basically, it switches perspectives between a Black woman who has lived in Brooklyn her whole life and a white guy who is dating, I remember his crappy girlfriend's name. I think her name was Kim, right? He moves into the neighborhood with his girlfriend. They think they're different. They don't realize that they're part of the gentrification problem. The crappy girlfriend, she really is a bad person, and in fact, she is one of the characters that I often have a problem with in books like this, where someone is so overtly racist, and I'm I really like when we're talking about racism, I like when we kind of represent the more subtle stuff, and maybe the people who don't realize that what they're doing is problematic, and that is represented in the real main white guy. I want to say his name was Toby. Dude, I have the book. Okay, Theo and Sydney. Is it Kim? I need to see if Okay, but the crappy girlfriend's name was Kim. I don't listen. I'm over here saying I hate characters who fall under that trope, but she was obviously the most memorable one, so whatever. Okay, so Theo is, in my opinion, a pretty good example of a well-meaning white person who just does things that are, sometimes it's stuff that's cringe, wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, but then other times it's stuff that's actively more harmful than he realizes. Honestly, I will say this book has a lot more entertainment value than social commentary value for me. So I wouldn't say that anything stuck with me a ton. I personally feel like I liked the horror thriller aspects the most. Basically, one of the big reasons that this neighborhood is becoming gentrified is because this area used to have a big drug problem. And this company comes in and is like, we're gonna like help all these people with their like drug addictions. We're gonna like just clean up this neighborhood. And it kind of turns into this like zombie sort of storyline where, you know, the people who don't really know what's going on get zombified, and the ones who don't are like that, you know, it just turns into a metaphorical zombie apocalypse. But then also this book is balancing a romance plot between Sydney and Theo, and I didn't care a ton for the romance plot. Maybe I'm just not remembering great, but I didn't feel a ton of chemistry between them, and I feel like the time that they finally, you know, hooked up, it was like in a moment of vulnerability for both of them, and it just felt like a like, hey, we're both here, so let's do this. And it didn't really feel, I just didn't feel a lot of chemistry between the two of them, and that's not bad. I guess there's nothing wrong about having a couple characters that hook up, but it wasn't satisfying in the way that I would typically think of a romance plot line. In a similar vein was Murder in the Family. So Murder in the Family is a book that Amber discovered on TikTok, and she really thought we should read it together. Like, it was this thing on TikTok where you should read this with your friends and see who can solve the mystery first. And that's a fun idea. And it's like this multimedia, it's marketed as this multimedia book where you can see like the text that people are sending to each other, and you can see news articles and like all this stuff. So basically the premise is this guy named Guy. When he was really young, his stepfather was murdered, and now he's older. He is a documentarian. He makes documentaries, and he wants to make a documentary finding out this unresolved case of the murder of his stepfather. He brings in like a psychologist and a detective and a journalist and like all these different experts. They meet for these different episodes of the documentary and discuss, you know, who done it. I had several problems with this book. First of all, like I said, it's marketed as this multimedia thing, but it is 90% the people on the documentary talking. It's written like a script instead of a book. There was just like a news article between each chapter, and that's about it. And sometimes they would find something from like a scene of the crime and it would show a picture of it, but like it really didn't feel like much more than the average book that might have a few images in it. This is a problem that I have with lots of mysteries. I don't like a mystery that waits so long to reveal vital information so that you can figure out who it is. I want to have a fighting chance in figuring it out. Sure, I don't want to figure it out within the first like 10% of the book, so like yes, you do have to slowly reveal some information, but when I found out who it was, I didn't really have a sense of, of course, that made sense all along. Oh, the other thing that bothered me was that, okay, spoiler alert, I guess. I don't know if this was on purpose or not, but as someone who makes YouTube videos, I was really constantly bothered by the way that the documentary never felt like something that would exist in real life. It often felt so scripted, or people who were supposed to be real people speaking their mind would say a cliffhanger perfectly at the end of a recording session. And they explained this by saying that like Guy and Nick, like the two guys behind the production, are like really manipulating everything, and the other characters are mad at them. So I guess that did get kind of explained away, but that didn't prevent me from being annoyed for about 300 pages, because it's like this group of people is talking about an interview that was conducted, and the person who conducted the interview, of course, knows what's going to be said, and they all watch the interview together, and they'll have questions, and then so-and-so will say, well, let's find out the answer to that question right now, and then unpause the interview, and it would, like, conveniently be exactly what everyone else was talking about. Like, it just felt so forced. So that was, I guess, more of a nitpick, and maybe that was done on purpose, but I don't think it was done, it wasn't clear to me whether or not it was being done on purpose. So yeah, overall, I mean, like, it was an enjoyable read. It was fun to read with Amber and kind of theorize together about that. Okay, let's get out of dark. What other moods did I have? I had adventurous. Not surprising, Percy Jackson, Chalice of the Gods, The Sun and the Star, fantasy. Magnus Chase. Yeah, I mean, I still read a lot of Rick Riordan this year, didn't I? Let's do a positive. Let's talk about the Chalice of the Gods. So, obviously, I've been very into Percy Jackson for the past few years. And when we heard that Rick Riordan was going to be touring for the Chalice of the Gods book, Crystal and I went friggin' crazy, and we booked tickets to go see him in Houston because that was the only day that worked well for both of us. So we went to see Rick do his little Chalice of the Gods tour. We got a free t-shirt. We watched him do some like Q&A and stuff, and it was just cool to be like in the same room as this guy who wrote like books that have shaped me as a person. It was just fun to be back in the world of Percy Jackson, be back in Percy's perspective, which we haven't seen since, like, first-person Percy, we haven't seen since the original series. And also, Grover, like, it was just so fun to be, like, back with Grover, because, again, like, we haven't seen much of him since the original series, and Grover is my main man. It was nice to be back in, like, with a book with, like, kind of the same vibe as the original 5. However, my biggest gripe with these books, there are, I believe, going to be 3, is that these are about Percy trying to get letters of recommendation to go to college. And coming after a 5-book series about a giant war, reading about Percy getting his college recommendation letters just feels a little bit like, oh wow, the stakes are so low. So it feels a little fluffy, it feels a little silly. I do miss having the high stakes, which I never thought I would say. But it's a very different vibe. It's very silly, but I've always liked that Percy is silly in the face of adversity, and now there's not a lot of adversity. But overall, it was a really fun read. Also under Adventurous is River of Teeth by Sarah Gailey, which is something that my friend Lindsay has been recommending on her YouTube channel for a really long time. I put it on my list of books that I would like for Christmas, and my brother got it for me, so thank you, Connor. I liked this book a lot, but not as much as I thought I would. It is a very short book, and it's the most interesting premise. It's about like an alternate universe where the US has domesticated hippopotami, and we follow a few people who all have their own hippopotamus who are going on a heist, I guess you could say, to kind of seek revenge on someone who has wronged the main character. I don't want to give away too much because it's such a short book. I really like the writing style. What did I not like? Why did I not like this book? Be right back. One thing that I remember really enjoying about this book is the diversity. Like, you have differently abled characters, you have characters of all different, like, races and classes and genders. It's actually perhaps the first book that I've read with a non-binary character where it is not a big deal at all that they're non-binary, and I really enjoyed that. Okay, I do feel like I had mixed feelings about the writing style. It's very much written, like, in this kind of, like, noir, like everyone is always saying the wittiest thing that they've ever said in their life, and it's fun to read stuff like that. And I think for, less than 200 pages I can handle it, but if I had to read a whole like novel written in this style, I think I would get sick of it. So like sometimes I was kind of cringing at the things that people would say, but other times I thought it was really fun. Why did I remember not enjoying this book that much, and now I cannot remember what my problem was with it. I mean, it was quite gory, and maybe sometimes I didn't love the gore. I just caught a glance of like kind of a catchphrase that a character uses. There were a lot of things like that where characters would repeat phrases a lot, and it's cute. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does get old after a while. But like overall, like I said, there were a lot of things that I really liked about this book. I thought the action was honestly well done, if a little gory at times. I did sometimes like the wit of the characters. I liked the diversity, and I really liked the characters themselves. Like the characters weren't diverse, just like sometimes it'll be like the characters are diverse in their appearance and gender and whatnot, but they're all kind of boring as characters. They all were like clearly their own people. They were very unique. Their own kind of writing style for each character. I thought it was a really fun book. So that's Adventurous. I read 6 funny books. Let me guess. Rick Riordan, and Rick Riordan. Yep. And Casey McQuiston. And Slaughterhouse-Five. Sure. let's talk about Slaughterhouse-Five. A couple of friends of mine do a classics book club, which I mentioned last year. And this year, I read 3. Slaughterhouse-Five, I enjoyed quite a lot. He does this thing where he'll say the most absurd or tragic things like it's just another Tuesday. And like, I'm gonna cry. Like, it makes it so much more emotionally impactful, right? Because the primary focus of the story is a man who fought in a war. I do believe it was World War II. And it kind of goes back and forth between the present day where he's writing about his experiences and the past as he's living these experiences. And the way he talks about death and tragedy in such a flippant manner makes it more impactful because you can see how numb he is. But it also makes it a little bit funny. Like, you have to chuckle. So, I mean, like, it was literally listed under funny. So I'm glad that other people do see, like, the dark humor here. It's beautifully written. The themes are dark. They make you think about war and life and death. There is, again, quite a lot of gore, which was hard for me to get through. But, oh, yeah, I gave this 4.5 stars. I really like his writing, and I would love to read something else by Kurt Vonnegut. What The Cat's Cradle, I think, is also by him. I need to read more by him because I really, really enjoyed that. I read 6 emotional books, trying to get out of moods and into some other statistics. I read 5 reflective books, 5 mysterious books. Again, you know, the ones that I've already talked about. And wait, Murder on the Orient Express was this year? Oh, well, now I wish I had talked about Murder on the Orient Express before I talked about Murder in the Family, because I would love to compare those two. And then I read 4 Tints books: informative, hopeful, challenging, sad, inspiring. Those were my moods for 2023. I read 11% slow-paced books this year, and oh yeah, is this based on what I said was slow or what other readers said was slow? Because I 100% agree with Royal Assassin and Devil in the White City as slow-paced. What did I read that was fast-paced? Riordan. Interesting. I would consider the Casey McQuiston books that I read this year to be fast-paced. I can agree with most of those. Let's go back to slow-paced, and I'll quickly talk about The Royal Assassin. So I've been reading the Farseer trilogy. I started it last year because I wanted to get more into adult fantasy, but I'm on the 3rd book now. The books are really starting to blend together for me. You know, the first book he's a kid, the 3rd book he's an adult, and in the 2nd book you kind of see him like in adolescence and transitioning into becoming a man. So it's kind of like, it's almost a little bit coming of age. You get to see his like romance with his kind of like childhood sweetheart Blossom, which is cute. Yeah, he just kind of starts becoming his own person. But anyway, I think I'll talk more about this trilogy after I finish the whole trilogy. So I'll come back to that. I'm reading the 3rd one right now. I'm really liking it. Yeah, I'll come back to this later. My other slow-paced book was The Devil in the White City, which I really, really enjoyed. This book, I just like randomly ran into it. It was not on my TBR or anything. I don't think I had heard of it at all. But for some reason, it stood out to me when I was in Barnes & Noble looking for some books to read on a trip to Chicago. But then I also saw The Devil in the White City, and I picked it up. I don't know why. I don't know what possessed me to do this. But I picked it up, and it is about the Chicago 1898, I believe, World's Fair, and Daniel Burnham, kind of like the architect behind the whole thing, and a murderer who goes by many different names, but Holmes, I think, is like his real name, H.H. Holmes, and it goes back and forth between these 2 perspectives of a guy who's just trying to get Chicago to be recognized as much as like New York City. He has so much like pride in Chicago, and he wants to put Chicago on the map, and he thinks this World's Fair is the way to do it. And then it'll cut back to this guy who, you know, started out in like all these different states and kind of worked his way towards Chicago, targeting helpless women that he can manipulate and eventually do creepy things to and murder them. My friend read this book, and she seemed to think that the Daniel Burnham stuff was kind of boring. I've been on a major Chicago urban planning, architecture, but definitely Chicago and urban planning like kick for this past year. So I thought it was super exciting. I thought it was really cool. I read this while we were in Chicago. So we're like in like the train station, and I'm like, the guy in my book designed this building. Like, it's just cool. But even my friend who wasn't into the Daniel Burnham part, right? She really liked the H.H. Holmes stuff. And I liked that too. I really liked both parts, and I thought it was so fascinating, and I like the way that the parts kind of come together, and towards the end of the book we're like solving the mystery, and we as the reader have walked with H.H. Holmes throughout his killing sprees, so it's really not a mystery to us, but it's really satisfying to watch the general public finally figure out it's him. And the other thing that I loved about this book is it's not historical fiction. It is like everything that happened in this book was true. And the author, I think, did a really good job of taking stuff that's 100% fact and making it interesting to read and putting it together in a cohesive project. I can just imagine him in the library putting all these pieces together, like solving a puzzle and creating this beautiful whole out of it. So one of my favorite reads of this year was The Devil in the White City by Eric Larson. Really, really cool. Page number, 42% under 300. Wow. No, yeah, that's true. A lot of the classics that I read this year were very short. I'm actually shocked that Chalice of the Gods is under 300. 288, sure. So a couple more classics that I read this year. The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. I'm actually shocked to see that I gave this a 4.25. Again, I think I was still figuring out my star rating, like especially compared to Slaughterhouse-Five. It's like, this book was okay. Well, and I guess also compared to other classics that we had read. The classics that I read before this year, I just didn't enjoy as much. But The Time Machine was good. Basically, we're hearing the story from a man who, like, he invites these guys into his house and he's like, hey, I invented a time machine. Here's what happened. And then he tells the story. I think it was basically like in the future, human society has split into two extremes. Like one group of people that is like oppressed and like they can't even think for themselves. They live underground. They're subhuman. And then this like crazy, enlightened, perfect upper class. And that's really all I remember. We see this in a lot of sci-fi books from that era where it's just like, hey, what if in the future this thing that's happening was like 10 times worse? And then they write 200 pages about that. And it's not terrible, but it's like, I don't really remember anything else. There's like a girl, I want to call them aliens. I guess they're earthlings, but they're like split into two groups. But there's a female one who kind of like bonds with him, and maybe they have like a romantic thing going on. That's all I remember. But I gave it 4.25. I think I just liked it more than some of the other classics I had read. My first classic of the year was Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie. I requested that we read an Agatha Christie in our book because I had a professor in college who was like, he really liked Agatha Christie. So I thought, okay, sure, like I'll try to get into it. I liked Murder on the Orient Express enough. I think my friends didn't like it a ton. One friend said that she felt like the characters were very stereotypical. And I do agree with that. Like the thing that I think is really cool about this book is that it's on a train with people from all over the world. So you have a very diverse group of characters, but it's written like a long time ago, right? So there were definitely some stereotypes about like country and race. There were definitely some gender stereotypes. I personally looked past that because I was like, this is just, I mean, I was trying more to focus on the plot and the mystery, because this is different, right? A lot of the classics that we've been reading are like trying to make some kind of social commentary. I don't think that Agatha Christie's trying to make a social commentary. I think she's trying to entertain. So that's what I tried to focus on. And I think the entertainment value was okay. So someone gets murdered on this train. That's the title of the book. And you follow Hercule Poirot, who's basically just trying to be Sherlock Holmes. You know, he's like this aloof, is he even aloof? He doesn't talk through his thought process. Detective. So it follows him and his assistant, whose name I don't remember, as he solves the mystery. And a lot of the book is just him interviewing people on the train. And that gets a little bit, I guess, boring to read after a while. But at the same time, I don't know, it's kind of nice for the sake of comparing everyone's stories. Like, there's a very level playing field. But I think the parts that I enjoyed the most were when we would get to, like, go see the scene of the crime or go inside their rooms on the train and, like, see evidence, not just hear people talking about what was going on, right? Personally, I'm actually, like, again, like, I give this a 3.5, but, like, if I were to compare this to Murder in the Family, of course, the mystery is more well executed. This is a classic mystery novel. This, I think, was a really good example. Honestly, I was a little disappointed. I think I need to read more mystery books because, like, maybe I'm missing something, but I feel like there's a possible way to write a mystery where you don't have to save the most important piece of information for, like, the very end. I want it to be possible for me to, like, figure out the solution before the detective. You know, I want to feel smart when I read a mystery. This book did a better job than Murder in the Family, because in Murder in the Family, it was like, oh, here's the final piece of evidence, and now everyone knows, and also you, the reader, know. Murder on the Orient Express, a quarter of the book is left when we get one vital piece of information. And I'm like, oh, okay, what does that mean? So maybe it means this, or maybe it means this, or this. And I have, like, a few theories, and then 20 pages later, we find out that one of my theories was right. And I was like, aha, I got it. Now, I didn't, like, figure it out that far before. I wasn't like, I knew it all along. But, like, I've known it for 20 pages. It's a more satisfying feeling. So I would say, like, as a mystery, I enjoyed it more than Murder in the Family, just to compare the two mystery books that I read this year. Okay, what else do we have? We have fiction versus nonfiction. I did read a lot of fiction this year. Let's look at nonfiction. I read Brown Girl Dreaming, and I already forgot that is nonfiction. Brown Girl Dreaming is a poetry collection by Jacqueline Woodson, sharing her childhood growing up as an African American in the 1960s and 1970s. She talks about so much stuff. She talks about moving from the country to the city and what that's like, being Jehovah's Witness, which I really don't know much about being a Jehovah's Witness, but, you know, she kind of talked about, you know, what it's like to, there's this one called Because We're Witnesses, and it's about no Halloween, no Christmas, no birthdays, even when other kids laugh as we leave the classroom, just as the birthday cakes arrive. We pretend we do not see the chocolate frosting. It's like, yeah, like, that would be hard, I think, to be, like, a little kid and, you know, I don't know, just, like, interesting stuff like that. I marked one poem because it is so related to what I care about, which is marginalized Englishes. I think that all English is right English, and if people can understand what you're saying, that's what matters. And I think that different accents and language varieties are beautiful. So yeah, I don't know, maybe I just want to read The Right Way to Speak, and future me can pick out a few excerpts. So it says, the first time my brother says ain't, my mother pulls a branch from the willow tree growing down the hill at the edge of our backyard. As she slips her closed hand over it, removing the leaves, my brother begins to cry because the branch is a switch now. You will never, my mother says, say ain't in this house. You will never say ain't anywhere. We are never to say huh, ain't, or y'all, get, or gonna. Never ma'am, just yes with eyes meaning eyes enough to show respect. Don't ever ma'am anyone. The word too painful, a memory from my mother of not so long ago, southern subservient days. You are from the north, our mother says. You know the right way to speak. And yeah, I teared up the first time I read that, because just seeing the way that gets ingrained into kids from such an early age, and thinking about the reason that it gets ingrained, and the way that it's not just, your white teacher telling you you're wrong. It's your family trying to keep you from going through what they went through. Yeah, it's just a good poem about, why I research what I research and why I care about that. So a good, reminder, and yeah, I put a little marker on it because it meant a lot to me. I gave this book 4.5 stars. It was very well written, beautiful poetry, very personal, really good stuff. The other nonfiction book that I read this year is Antisocial Language Teaching, English and the Pervasive Pathology of Whiteness by J.P.B. Gerald, and I gave it 5 stars. I discovered this book when I was back on Twitter, and I would follow a bunch of linguists on Twitter, again, especially ones who focus on marginalized dialects and that kind of stuff. And I was following this linguist named J.P.B. Gerald. He announced when he had published this book, Antisocial Language Teaching, and I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. Asked for it for Christmas, got it for Christmas, very, very happy about it. This is really frustrating because I gave it 5 stars, but it's on campus, so I can't refresh my memory. I want to say this book is mostly theoretical, like talking about race and language. I read it with a notepad, and I was like taking notes and like underlining stuff and saying, oh, it would be really cool to do a study on this. And like there was just a lot of like stuff that inspired me to do research. And then towards the end, the one thing I remember that was maybe the other parts of it weren't so theoretical either, but the thing that I remember being like really tangible is that he talked about a series of lessons and kind of webinars that he did on race and language. And, people came to these webinars to learn about marginalized dialects. And so you had people like me, you had quotes from those people talking about what they learned from the class. But you also had participants who spoke AAVE or spoke like Chicano English or, some kind of other marginalized English accent, maybe non-native English speakers. And, they gave perspectives that I had not. So, like the white participants, I'm like, okay, like I feel seen, we're kind of going through the same process. But the other participants, it was really nice to see their perspectives and things that maybe I hadn't thought of before. So I give this 5 stars because it's like right up my alley. I know it's maybe a more niche interest, but if it's something you're into, really, really good stuff. And also just look into J.P.B. Gerald and his podcasts and like, he's a cool guy. Genres. Wow, that's a lot of LGBT. Okay, that's 5 LGBT. Hold on. I haven't talked about any of the LGBT. I read 5 LGBT books this year, as I am wont to do. And I haven't talked about, the only one that I've talked about is River of Teeth. Okay, well, let's go through my queer books. I read The Sun and the Star by Rick Riordan, which is, you know what, this isn't even a spoiler anymore. If you haven't read Heroes of Olympus, skip ahead, I guess. But The Sun and the Star is about Nico D'Angelo from the Percy Jackson series and his little boyfriend, Will Solis, and their journey through the depths of Tartarus to kind of, Nico's got this like voice going on in his head that's saying, I think like, come save me, or come avenge me, or something along those lines. He doesn't really know who's calling out to him from Tartarus, but someone is. He knows he has to go down there. So he goes, and he takes his boyfriend, who is the son of the god of the sun, Apollo. He's the son of Apollo. Crystal read this book recently, and we were kind of talking about what we liked and didn't like, and I think it just reminded me of the parts that I didn't like so much. Things that I did like were being back in the universe. There were parts that I really liked about, like, Nico and Will's relationship, but this book is written by Rick Riordan and Marco Shiro, who is more of a queer LGBT writer, which is why Rick brought them on for the project, and I love that. I think Rick felt that he would struggle to portray the experience of 2, gay teen boys. I was saying to Crystal, and I also have heard people make this critique, that it feels like a fan fiction because Will and Nico don't quite feel like themselves. They feel like perfect, sweet characters in another LGBT coming-of-age series where people really communicate and talk about their feelings, and it's like a really feel-good LGBT, like cute book. I love a book like that. If I didn't know Will and Nico, I think I would have loved this book. but it didn't really feel like Will and Nico. I think Nico needs to be a little angstier and say things that are like wrong, and maybe he and Will don't sort out the disagreement for several chapters. The thing that bothered me the most about this book is the light dark imagery. Going into it, I knew that was going to be part of it, and I don't necessarily have a problem with like, okay, son of the god of the dead and son of the god of light and the sun. It's like, obviously there's like a contrast there. I didn't like the way they handled it. I didn't like how often light was treated as a metaphor for good and dark was treated as a metaphor for bad. I didn't like that Will always seemed to be trying to find the light in Nico. And I didn't feel like we addressed that too much sun exposure can be bad for you. Or, we need the dark to, have our circadian rhythm and go to sleep at night. Light and dark are not, one's good and one's bad. The only moment, spoiler alert, that really did make it better for me was when Will was in Persephone's garden and she was talking about loving someone who is so closely related to death and what that's like, and why it's hard but how you make it work, and how death is not inherently bad. And that was a really good scene, but it was about halfway through and then Will just kind of went back to the same old I can find the light in you. And it's like, that's not, we don't need to find the light in Nico to make him a worthy person. He is worthy. He doesn't have to be more like you, Will, to be a good person. You know what I mean? Like, I did not like that metaphor. That really bothered me. And I think that was my biggest gripe with the book. I gave it 4.25 stars because I was really happy to be back in that universe. But comparing it to Chalice should be higher. And I do want to read, by the way, I don't want to crap on Mark Oshiro. I didn't love the combination of their writing style with Rick's writing style, but I think that, I want to read more of Mark's work because I bet that they would write a really mean LGBT coming of age novel. But it just felt a little strange in this fantastical Rick Riordan world. Other LGBT books that I read this year, I'll talk about both Casey McQuiston books at the same time. So first I read Red, White, and Royal Blue. Obviously Red, White, and Royal Blue is a book that's been really big on BookTube for a long time. If you don't know, it's about the son of the president dating the son of the Prince of Wales, I want to say. It's enemies to lovers. They start out with this kind of rivalry because the American guy thinks the British guy's pretentious, and the British guy thinks the American guy's so unserious. But slowly they fall in love, and then they have to face are we going to get in trouble for our relationship? Especially Henry is worried about the crown and their ideas of, preserving the royal blood. He is especially worried and has a lot of, internalized homophobia. It's a good book. One thing that really struck me is that I think Casey McQuiston did a fantastic job of writing the British character. Compare this to those Harry Potter books that I hate. Not Harry Potter. The ones that are Carry On Simon Snow. Those are written by an American trying to make a teen girl's idea of basically a Harry Potter fanfic. And just sometimes the British characters they're all British characters because they're supposed to be like Harry Potter. But they would just say things that a British person would not like. I watch British YouTubers. I mean, I'm not an expert or anything, but I have heard enough British people talk to know that they just wouldn't talk like that. I feel like Casey McQuiston really made Henry talk like an actual British teen in the past 10 years, which was nice. I thought their chemistry was good. I felt like the enemies to lovers was done well. I surprisingly liked the political stuff. So for a while I was annoyed that we kept switching back to the political stuff because I wanted to get into the romance. But by the end of the book, it's, an election cycle, and we want to see if Alex, our American boy's mom, is going to get reelected. And they're from Texas. And as someone from the South, his hope for winning Texas, turning Texas blue and really cinching the election, and other people didn't believe in him. I felt that because as a Southern, I don't want to get too political, but as a Southern Democrat, I know the feeling of being a blue voice in a red state and feeling like your voice doesn't count, very relatable. So even the political stuff I quite liked after a while. Yeah, overall it was a good book. A little steamy for me personally. Like there's quite a lot of, I'll just say it. I used to like shy away from this on my channel, but like if you're gonna read this book, I want you to know there's a good amount of smut. So if you're not into that, like you might have to skim over some stuff or just, maybe skip this one. But there's a lot of smut. It was a bit much for me. I think that's the main reason that I took a point away. I had very similar thoughts about One Last Stop, also by Casey McQuiston. So obviously I liked their writing so much that I wanted to read another one of their books. And this one is about, One Last Stop is like so cool. I think I only gave it 4.25. Which is weird because looking back, I feel like I like it even more than Red, White, and Royal Blue. But I was talking to Crystal and she didn't really like One Last Stop. So like I maybe being swayed by her opinion subconsciously, but still. This story is about a young woman who moves to New York from New Orleans, I believe. And she meets on the train this beautiful, mysterious woman. And this woman, her name is Jane. She's like listening to a tape deck, and she's just, our main character, I can't remember her name, August, just thinks of it as like a one-off encounter. But I don't know, a couple days later, she gets on the same train and she sees Jane again. She's like, okay, cool. And like Jane is like kind of mysterious. Like when August asks her about her life, she doesn't always seem confident when she talks about like what she does and where she's from. And we slowly discover that Jane is caught in a time loop. Basically, she's like, she never ages, but she's caught on on the Q train, like permanently. She's like stuck on this train. So August simultaneously starts to develop a crush on Jane and starts to try to help Jane to figure out who she is, how she got in the situation, and if they can get out of this situation. Again, the romance is very well done. The chemistry that they have is very good. It's nice and different from Red, White, and Royal Blue. Some authors, they kind of do the same thing. August has some really nice friends. You got again, like a casual trans character who like we don't even really know until we see like a baby picture of him on the refrigerator, and August is like, who's this? And he's like, oh, that's me when I was a kid. And August is kind of like, oh, okay, cool. And that's about it. And then we're like, okay, he's trans, moving on. And who else? Can't remember. Her name started with an M, but there was this like really cool friend who's into like art and engineering. And by the way, like her like kind of side passion projects end up becoming really important to the main plot. Nico's side passion projects also become important to the main plot. He's like a psychic and they try to, do a seance to figure out what Jane's deal is. Wes has these connections with like, man, I don't want to spoil too much, but every friend has something that winds up being really important to the plot, which is very satisfying. And yeah, overall, it's a fun book. But again, not a lot. I don't think there was as much smut as Red, White, and Royal Blue, but there's still quite a lot. So just FYI, the thing with Casey McQuiston is like they'll get to the smut about halfway through and you're like, cool, these two people are together and I'm happy about it. Let's get back to the plot. And we'll get back to the plot for like half a second and then there's more smut. And I'm like, wait, hold on. I thought we were done with that. But they're still going at it. So that was my main gripe. I don't really remember why else I took points away from this book. Yeah, so the last book is Solitaire by Alice Oseman. Alice Oseman is the author of the Heartstopper series that I talked about last year. Was it really only last year that I read Heartstopper? Man, those boys have like become a part of my life. The Heartstopper series is like a very charming gay coming of age romance graphic novel series. And the main character, Charlie, has a sister named Tori, who I love. She is so blunt and sarcastic and kind of a loner, and she really reminds me of me. So I have kind of always had Solitaire on my TBR because this book focuses on Tori, and I liked it. So Tori's like a Tumblr girl, loner, who just wants to get through her senior year of high school, junior year of high school. Oh, right, they're British. That's why I couldn't figure out how old she was. Yeah, I think she's like a year 13, which is why I thought she was like so old. I don't know what a year 13 is. She's in high school, and she's just trying to get through it. She doesn't really have friends, and the friends that she does have aren't the best. And early on in the book, two boys kind of reach out to her. One, she discovers these arrows pointing her towards a computer lab. And in the computer lab, one of the computers is on a Tumblr blog called Solitaire. Tori's like, okay, that was weird. And while she's in the computer lab, she meets one of the guys. I think it's Michael Holden, who is a disaster bisexual, a really chill, like theater kid kind of guy. He's very outgoing and bubbly, really kind of the polar opposite of Tori. And she's kind of like, why are you reaching out to me? What is this? This is weird. Later that day, I think, in like another class, this boy from her childhood walks up to her and is like, "You're Tori! Oh my gosh, we used to be best friends when we were kids, and I want to still be best friends now." And he's like kind of coming on too strong. I guess it's supposed to kind of create a love triangle, but Tori, to me, has always given Ace vibes, and I think she just doesn't care that two boys are paying a bunch of attention to her, and I'm like, that is very relatable. But yeah, these two boys are suddenly like making Tori their world, and someone starts playing pranks on the school, like messing with the PA system to play songs when the principal's supposed to be giving announcements and that kind of stuff. Whenever these pranks happen, they're always like signed by Solitaire, or something on the Solitaire blog is clearly related to the pranks that are happening. So Tori's like, what's going on? It's like she kind of wants to figure out what's going on with Solitaire, and the people around her definitely do. But Tori, this book also definitely discusses depression. And although Tori seems intrigued by what's going on, she does not have the motivation, and she convinces herself that she does not care. Well, I guess I don't want to give too much away, but one thing that I really liked about this book was the relationship between Tori and Michael. I really like the way that Michael doesn't feel entitled to Tori's time or to, get a kiss or a hug from her or anything. He doesn't feel entitled to her body or her time. I really admire him and the way that their friendship develops rather than just being like straight romance. Yeah, overall, I thought it was pretty good. I think Alice Oseman shines more with the drawings and the graphic novel format, but I liked Tori's story. Okay, back to genres. I read 4 middle grade books. Magnus Chase. Okay, I haven't talked about so my last Rick Riordan book was Magnus Chase and the Sword of Summer. I started Magnus Chase this year, and I liked it a lot. First of all, I like how right out of the gate he's like cussing, and I'm like, oh, this is for, like, teenagers. There's not a lot of swearing in Magnus Chase, but it is obviously for an older audience than Percy Jackson, and I liked that. It's a typical Riordan book, right? He finds out he's the son of Frey, goes on a quest, blah, blah, blah. The thing that I really liked, Rick Riordan is really good at writing characters, and what I really liked about this first book was the characters. Magnus is okay, he's a main character everyman, not tremendously different from, like, Percy. A little snarky, a little bit, how did I end up in this situation? But along with Magnus are Blitz and an elf, Hearthstone, and oh man, y'all, they're so cool. So you got this like kind of stereotypical dwarf character, he's kind of like Gimli, he's gruff, and he's like, let me at him, but he's only like 3 feet tall. And then you have the elf character who's, again, stereotypical elf. He's very stoic and patient, but they both have their own unique attributes. Blitz is also really into fashion, which comes to his advantage later in the story. And Hearthstone is deaf, which is so interesting, a kind of representation that I don't think I've really seen before. Just the little ways that, like, if you want to get his attention, you have to wave at him and stuff like that. Just things that, like, we don't think about. And it's it's really solid, just like he's here and he's deaf representation. It's not normally a huge, no, that's what bothered me, is his deafness does become a big deal in one of the action scenes. I don't remember very well, and I'm not going to try to remember better because I don't want to spoil, but his deafness does become like, oh, his weakness is actually his strength, and I don't really like that cliche. I want him to just be like a deaf guy who's just there. But I do think with 3 books, like if this is not a normal occurrence, I think one time him using his deafness as an advantage is like, okay, yeah, sure. Sometimes disabilities can give you an advantage. So I'm not mad about it. We'll see how it goes from here. But I also, the character that I loved the most was Samira. So Samira is a daughter of Loki. And she is a hijab wearing Muslim girl. I guess, spoiler alert. But towards the end, she gives this really beautiful speech. And at this point, I was listening to the audiobook because I had a long drive. So maybe that helped the emotional impact. But she gives this really beautiful speech about how children of Loki are not trusted. And, it's just a really good metaphor for the way that we continue to treat Muslims in this country. And yeah, I thought it was a really good metaphor. I mean, I guess that's all there is to say, but I'm really intrigued by Samira's character. A classic Riordan, strong girl, but I'm really interested to see where her arc goes, along with Blitz and Hearth and Magnus too. Magnus is here. I read 4 classics, as I told you. Okay, still haven't talked about A Clockwork Orange. I enjoyed A Clockwork Orange. Right out of the gate, they're talking in this weird, imaginary future teen slang dialect that is like impossible to understand. It makes you almost want to just put the book down. After a chapter of that, you're like, I don't know if I can handle this. As a linguist, I actually enjoyed it. I have critiques about the language, but I do think it made it fun. It was very entertaining to read and slowly figure out, oh, that's what that means. Or, I thought that meant that, but it's actually that. That being said, I don't think there was a lot of logic to why. I would actually like to do a little bit more research into why Burgess made the choices that he did with language. When you think about like 1984, and it's easy for me to talk about this because I read it in high school and like actually talked about stuff like with a teacher and like she explained like why Orwell made the choices he made, The lack of creativity in the language represents the lack of creativity in the human psyche in this kind of dystopian future that he's imagining. In A Clockwork Orange, it's mostly just a lot of Russian words. I guess it represents fascism or like communism or like something that we generally perceived as Russian when this book was written. I'm not really sure. So like it was fun to read, it was interesting, but the extent of his linguistic innovation just boiled down to Russian is scary. But in addition to the language, I think this book is really interesting. You have an unreliable narrator who openly admits that he likes to beat up old people for fun. Like he's just kind of like, this is what I almost like, this is my other reason that I think I docked points is like, it's kind of just a dystopian future where teens are bad and they beat up old people because that's what teens do. You're supposed to hate him. And he gets arrested. In prison, someone comes to him and offers kind of or he hears somehow about an easy way out where he can become reformed. And he's like, oh, well, I'll do that, I'll become reformed, but then I'll just go back out into the world and continue to be a crappy person. The way he becomes reformed is basically brainwashing, and it becomes, in my opinion, a really interesting thought experiment about morality. I will say it's pretty on the nose. There are characters who will just straight up say, but is it morality if you don't choose it? And it's like, oh, okay, so you just told me the theme of the book. Thanks. But it is an interesting thought, right? That like if basically an evil person is reformed by being brainwashed, are they good? Like, are they truly good, or are they like nothing? Do we value free will more than we value a peaceful and safe society? I don't know. So I think that the questions that are asked in this book are really, really interesting. I think the language was fun. I don't love how it really often felt like teens versus adults and like the kids these days. There were just certain things that were hit and miss for me. But overall, I enjoyed A Clockwork Orange enough. I read 4 fantasy books, young adults. Oh man, okay. Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I, of course, had to read the new Suzanne Collins book. I liked this book a lot. I thought that it was wow, I give it 5 stars. That's crazy. Honestly, it's like 4.75, if not 5. I went into it the same way I think a lot of people went into it. Oh no, a villain backstory. I don't want to sympathize with Snow. And honestly, it completely subverted my expectations. It is not a villain backstory. It's not trying to make you sympathize with Snow. It's trying to make you understand Snow. And I think it's really important to understand why people like Snow end up like him. We need to understand how people get that way. I think it was so interesting at the beginning of the book. He's poor, but he still believes he's rich, and he still believes in the capital. And it really reminds me of poor people voting for rich people, Republican or Democrat, because oh, this is my party and they're going to help me and they care about people like me. They care about the working man, when the rich basically only care about themselves. There are exceptions, but like it felt very real. It felt like very true of things that are happening in the US now. And I was like, wow, Snow has been like people that I know. Yeah, we watch as Snow becomes, I don't know, jaded. We see the opportunities that he has to be a good person and the opportunities he has to be a bad person, and how and why he chooses almost every bad opportunity. It's really, really interesting. Sci-fi, sure. Time machine, mystery. Yeah, I already talked about mystery books. Historical. Under historical, I have the book Thunder Rolling in the Mountains by Scott Odell. My mom kind of gave these books to me because she had had them since she was a lot younger, and they were kind of nostalgic books, and she was gonna donate them, but she was like, Becca might like these, so she passed them on to me. His most known book is Island of the Blue Dolphins, and I don't know a lot about Island of the Blue Dolphins, but my understanding is that he is a white man who writes very well-researched books about Native American history. And, you know, when my mom was a kid in the 70s, own voices literature was not really a thing. It had a lot of acclaim for being a pretty authentic representation of Native American voices. And I thought, I'll give it a try. You know, I'm not going to be like, it's not own voices, so screw you, Mom. I'm not going to read your book. So I read it, and this book was about a Nez Perce girl. I also learned that I don't think that's the name that they prefer, but I can't remember the name that they prefer. So yeah, Nimipu girl, who is the daughter of the chief. You know, it's settler colonial times, so it kind of follows their story of being kicked off their land, and then they go to a different place, and then they get kicked off there, and then they go to a different place, and then they get kicked off there, and it just kind of shows the progression of them being forced farther and farther west. At the same time, she's a 14-year-old girl. She's betrothed to marry this guy who's like a warrior, and this is really interesting because her father is very pro-peace. He does not want to fight the white men. He just wants to do as they say, and just if we do as they say, they will let us stay where we're supposed to be, and they won't break their word. And almost everyone else is like, have you seen the white people? They're going to break their word. So like you kind of have these other people who are fighting back against the white people. So there's discord within their tribe, and then there's also, of course, the white people attacking them and forcing them to move farther west. I thought this book was good. I thought it was not particularly eye-opening. Like, I watched Killers of the Flower Moon this year, and I learned a lot about Native American history that I did not know. This was like, okay, yeah, white people were crappy and pushed the Native Americans west. I knew that, but it was interesting to read it from like an inside perspective. So I thought that was good. I think my biggest gripe with the book is that it's written for like middle grade, and it's just a lot of the writing was very straightforward, very like, here's what happened, here's what happened. Yeah, almost like too matter of fact. Like sometimes I wanted like a little more detail, or just like, yeah, some elaboration. It would just be kind of like, and then he died. That's not a great example, but like, I mean, kind of, sometimes it would be like someone died and it would just be like they died. And it was like, oh, like, and maybe that's because, you know, it was written for a younger audience, so they didn't want to like go into the gory details of someone's death. But like, yeah, there were just a lot of things that I was like, whoa, that's all you're going to say about that? It went by very fast. Yeah, I will say I really liked the main character. Wow, I can't remember her first name because it is in first person. Yeah, we just didn't get to see her name a ton. But I liked her quite a lot. She was very strong-willed and like just kind of did what she thought was right, and like very independent. We end up in this scene where she's like kind of having to do stuff on her own, and she's literally 14. I don't want to spoil too much, but like she's an independent, strong character. I think like for a younger reader would probably enjoy this, but I think it just skewed a little too young for me. I read contemporary books. I read about race, dystopian, thriller, romance, crime, education, magical realism, true crime, poetry, memoir, literary history. My most read authors were Rick Riordan and Casey McQuiston. Surprise, surprise. Let's see, there's like a little bit of information about like my overall trends. So this year it looks like June was a really good reading month for me. That's when I read, well, will it show me what I read in June? No, rude. But definitely that was when I read Red, White, and Royal Blue. And I don't know, 2 other books. June was good for me. Summer's always pretty good. And then I kind of cinched 3 books in December, last minute, and my star ratings. So this is interesting to see. My average star rating was 4.17 stars. Let's see if there's any trends. So my 5-star books are Antisocial Language Teaching and The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Pretty different books there. 4.25, I have The Sun and the Star and One Last Stop. So like kind of queer YA books are 4.25 for me maybe. But then The Time Machine is also here. 3.5, I bet. No. Okay, yeah, I guess the biggest trend that I see is that I gave both Murder in the Family and When No One Is Watching 3.5 stars. So these kind of like dark mystery were a lot lower than most of my other books, and Murder on the Orient Express. I think I go really hard on mysteries because like I want them to feel so satisfying. I want to figure it out like just before the detective figures it out, but not too soon before where it felt too easy. Like it's hard to please me with a mystery novel. And then my lowest book was Thunder Rolling in the Mountains, which like I said, it was more just that I don't think I'm the target age range for that book. But yeah, overall, I read 19 books, and on average, they were 4.17 stars, which I think is pretty good. And I tried not to go like too easy on books. I'm still figuring out my star system, like what a 4 means for me, what a 5 means for me. But yeah, overall, I feel like I had a pretty good reading year. My reading goal for this year is to, as always, try to read 2 books a month. 20 as a fallback, 25 as kind of like a stretch goal. But the biggest thing about my reading goal this year is I want to lean more into audiobooks. The more I look on BookTube, right, I like compare myself to BookTubers so much. And they're like, oh yeah, this year I read like 100 books. And I'm like, okay, that's insane. But like a lot of them are listening to audiobooks. And I'm like, wait, I can do that. Why am I comparing myself to people and then like not using their same strategies? But yeah, I want to lean more into audiobooks this year and hope that I can reach my 24-book reading goal, even if, maybe really I only read physically like 20 books, and then 4 of them are audiobooks that I listen to like slowly while I was just a little bit every day at the gym. So that's kind of my goal for this year. Thank you for bearing with me. I feel like I've been recording this video for a zillion years. And yeah, I hope I will, be back with a few more videos this year. Thank you for watching this video. Thank you for sticking around when I haven't posted in like a year. And I hope we'll be back with a few more videos this year. I'm working on a couple exciting side projects. So, stick around. There is stuff that I'm working on slowly but surely. So yeah, thanks again for watching. If you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And tell me what your favorite book of 2023 was. I really like getting book recommendations. I know I don't need more book recommendations, but I like getting book recommendations. So recommend me some books in the comments. And yeah, like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya.